Hello, fantasy baseball fans. I'm Paul Williamson. This is Fantasy MLB Today, a Sports Ethos presentation. As always, it is a pleasure to bring another offseason edition of the podcast. We got a very special guest today. Before we get on that, take care of a little housekeeping. Make sure you follow me on the Twitter at PaulW_34. That's at PaulW_34 to get more of me because you know you want more of me. And then also make sure you follow me on the Blue Sky at PaulW34. There's no underscore there. And then, of course, Sports Ethos Fantasy Baseball accounts on Sports Ethos Fantasy BB on the Twitter. And then for Sports Ethos Fantasy MLB on Blue Sky. And as always, make sure you remember that BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers, hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered for every game, every play, every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. All righty, y'all. As I said, we got ourselves a very special guest in the pod today. His name is Ariel Cohen. He does obviously the most accurate fantasy baseball projections, the ATC projections. This guy is just a legend in the fantasy baseball world. Ariel, man, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and good morning to you, Paul. How are you?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I just got my coffee, got myself a couple of pastries in me, and man, I'm ready to rock and roll. We are before we get into all of this, man, just real quick, just a quick little background about you. What got you into fantasy baseball? Like, what was your what got you into it? Like, what drew your passion?
Well, I always loved baseball. I mean, I grew up. My dad took me to baseball games, watched the Mets and everything. Played baseball, played softball when I was, younger. And, joined some leagues, had an office league, had a synagogue league, and just played it.
Nice.
Loved the game, loved the stats part of it, loved the baseball part of it. Where else can you get baseball and math combined?
Right. And my thing is I'm not a math guy, right? And so for me, that's the part that's kind of a struggle because all throughout school, I was a kid, hey, we got a 20-page research paper instead of a test. I'm like, cool. That's awesome. But they're like, here's a multiple choice question or a bunch of equations, and I'm freaking out. So yeah, no, that's crazy. That kind of that's the way that your brain works. But it makes a ton of sense, man. And fantasy baseball players across the world, thank you, and I thank you as well, man. You can follow Ariel at ATCNY. That's at ATCNY on Twitter. And he writes for Fangraphs and Rollerballers. So make sure you go check out his content because it's the best content that there is. You're not going to find anything better, man. Ariel, of course, thank you so much for joining me, man. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit of auction drafts, and then we're going to get into your projections, man. So let's start out with the auction drafts, and why don't you give the people a quick breakdown of what is an auction draft?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of ways that you can pick players for your fantasy baseball roster. You can do a salary cap style where, you have a certain amount of money to spend and everyone could have the same players, right? It's whoever you want to pick as long as it's under budget. You can do the snake draft style where I pick, you pick, the next guy picks, and then we go around and we go backwards through it. But an auction is where, hey, you have your 15 guys in the league or however many guys you have, and you take turns nominating players. I nominate Mike Trout for $1, $3, $4, and you're each given a budget. Typically, $260 would be a typical budget that someone gets. Have to buy players for at least $1. Bidding increments are $1 or whatever rules that you guys set, and you keep going until every single last player is picked and your teams are filled out. That's the general notion of an auction draft.
Yeah. I would love to experience a live auction draft. To be able to, the people just yelling out the names, and I guess you got like an auctioneer going on, and I don't know if it would be a stereotypical the guy going that's like the super fast talking guy.
If you get a good guy, then yeah.
That would be really cool. That is kind of I guess a little bucket list of mine for fantasy baseball for me. And one of these days, maybe I will get there, maybe not. But let's
say bucket list. But you're not an old guy. You could do it now. You can get into it this year.
Right. I'm in Lubbock, Texas. I don't know how close the closest live auction draft would be for me. That would be. I know for sure. Like if I can never ever make it up to New York, then I would probably that would be on my list of things to do on top of all the sightseeing and the baseball games I'm going to want to watch. I'm sure there might be one maybe in Austin or something. I don't know. I have to look into that. But let's get into the to the nominations process, and I feel like that's there's a lot of gamesmanship that happens there. And whenever you're nominating players for yourself, do you think it's beneficial to nominate late round guys early, or do you want to like flip it around the other way?
I mean, when you're nominating players, you need to have a reason for doing so.
Yeah,
And nominations are very important. You don't want to just nominate anybody. Just, hey, get money off the board. Oh, what the hell? Just throw out the highest value guy. You have to think strategically about why you want to nominate people. The idea is you want to have the course of the auction where you pick up players that you want for less and make players that you don't want go artificially more than they should. I mean, you would love it if you bought every player for $1 and then everybody
right,
just at $80, right? You want people to artificially go higher. So the trick is to nominate people to influence the economics of the room so that you create artificial inflation for quantities and assets and players that you don't want, right? And draw it so that there's no extra economic pressure for the players that you want. By nominating a late round guy early, sure, if you have nothing else to do, if there's no more importance of what you want to get in the nomination, you can. Very often what I'll do is if somebody that I particularly don't want that I think is valued at, let's say, $8, $9. I don't particularly want him. When I do my research, the market is only paying like $1 or $2. Yet I don't want that particular bargain. I call it like Joey Votto. Late in his career, he always looked like a value compared when I looked at my projections, but I didn't really want to roster Joey Votto, so I would throw him out earlier on, $2. Maybe some guy would go 3 or 4. Still a good bargain compared to what my projections would say, but not the ridiculous bargain of $1. So I would try to artificially get his price up by nominating him early. Sure, I would do that. And at times, depends upon what you accomplish, that would happen. I would never nominate a guy like that super early, but I would do that at some point in the draft that I think if I wait any longer, he's going to really be underpriced and somebody else would get a bargain.
yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. When uh, you talk about influencing the economics of the room. Um, do you do you do that by when do you start nominating your targets basically? Like the guys that you want, how do you set out to acquire them in an auction draft basically?
Well, I mean, it's not that I have targets. I have some players that I think are potentially good values. I mean, I'm good
Okay.
with taking anybody at the right price. And when you
Okay.
do your research and you see what your values are and you look at what the market values are and what people are paying, very often you'll get, and I call them hot spots. Very often you'll get maybe, let's say, fourth first baseman that are about $5 worth. I don't particularly love anyone, but
Mhm.
those seem to be bargains, right?
Yeah.
You know, you want to get into that kind of spot where okay, I can get any of them. You know, a target for me is a spot. It's a hot spot where I think I can get value. If you have a certain player earlier on or high up that your plan is contingent on, maybe there's only one guy in the range that you would like, you sort of want to nominate him earlier than later. Now, you might lose him. Obviously, if you wait long enough, prices sometimes go down. But if you don't get the player, then where do you pivot, right? If you don't
Right. Right.
nominate him early enough, if he's your plan A, your plan B might be out the window. Somebody might have nominated your plan B, your secondary option. Oh, crap. He's not
Yeah.
available anymore. I shouldn't have waited. And now my guy is way too expensive. Or, it's my guy. I got to get him. It's $3 over, but, well, it's the only thing available. So,
Right.
yes, in general, your targets or your crucial players for your plan should be nominated earlier than you think or early enough that you can pivot to somewhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And so is it more you trying to let's see here. Whenever you get down toward the end and there are more scarcity of players. Are you typically want to try to obviously try to avoid having to spend extra on like a guy that might be a 15th round guy in a normal snake round draft. How do you find yourself wanting to go like a little over budget early on in order to make sure you lock down a guy, or because it seems like you're trying to keep yourself flexible, right? So whenever you're nominating guys, are you keeping those tiers in mind or do you strictly hold to the values that you present or the values that you have?
Well, I mean, I would not want to, if I think a player is worth $5, I would not want to spend $10 on him, right? And
Right,
if I
right.
can, if a guy is worth $25, I would not want to, in general, spend $30, right? I want to
Mhm.
get guys under the value that I think I am. If you keep getting guys that are over your value,
Right.
you're actually not gonna do well, right? If you think that there's a $15 player and you buy him for 15, and a $20 player and you buy him for 20, and a $30 player and you buy him for 30, if you do that and you have $260 total, you're going to end up spending $260 on $260 of what you perceive as value. That's actually not a good thing. That
Mhm.
that's an average scenario, right? You're spending what the player is worth. That's not, it's gonna get you an average team. You want to
Mhm. Mhm.
spend less than the money. You want to spend $260 on $300 of value. And the only way to do that is to buy players at discounts. So in general, you can't. Now, prices in an auction, it's a closed economic system. There are some things that the market values more. It's possible that in your particular auction for this particular year, elite starting pitchers might be going $4 above your values. You think that um, Zach Wheeler is this. You think that Paul Skeens is a certain price. You think that Tarek Skubal is a certain price, but they're going $4 above. Now, if every one of those quantities are going $4 above, if you spend $2 above your values, right? It's over your values, but it's less than what the market is giving a
Yeah.
premium on elite pitchers. You're getting what I call a relative bargain, right? You're spending 2 above where everybody is spending 4 above. That is a good deal because
Okay.
everybody is paying the premium. There'll be discounts later on. You'll get your discounts later on, but you'll at least get that top pitcher and you won't pay as much as the total market premium. The idea is to do that. So you have to look and be shrewd to understand how the market is playing. Now, if everybody's going $8 over, I'm not buying that. There's a limit to that. Yeah, I might just say I'm going to cap it at $5 over. I'll go if the market is so hot that it's going $8 over. I'll take anybody for $5 over, but no more. So you have to run it. And by the way, it goes the other way. If everybody is going at a discount, if everybody's going $1 under your values in a certain quantity, if you spend $1 under, you're not doing yourself great either. You're going to need to go $2 under, right? Whatever
Mm.
you need to do, you need to get a relative bargain on what the market is paying.
Okay, that I like that interesting concept. How it's a closed market. So like you might be going in thinking, well, I'm going to spend this much on this and this much on that. But then as you get into the auction, you're like, oh wow, these guys are going for way more or way less than you think, and it's got to change the way. So is that a way that you kind of let the auction come to you, as opposed to you going in with like a set plan?
No, not at all. It's not about the
Okay.
auction coming to you. You
Okay.
you you need when you make a plan, the plan for me usually is where I perceive possible bargains. I
Okay.
know that there's going to be a couple of $25 outfielders worth only 22. And my plan is to snag one of them because that would mean a bargain, right?
Right.
But it's
Right.
not that it comes to you. You know that. You now make nominations so that you can get that bargain. It doesn't come to
Mm.
you. You have to read the menu of you have to take the temperature of the room and read the menu of what prices are going for. It doesn't come to you. You just have to be observant. But you have to be
Okay.
proactive in what spots you want to get. Oh my goodness, this spot is really much higher than I think. Let's pivot elsewhere. It's not about coming to you.
Yeah.
It's being proactive about
Yeah.
where you think the market inefficiencies are.
Awesome, awesome. So, do you nominate high-end players? When do you start nominating the high-end guys? Like, when do you think is a good spot for that? Because, because you want to obviously maybe you want to maybe nominate the high-end guys that you don't really want, but want to see someone else throw 30, 40 bucks at, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, let's take an example of a high-end player that I don't really want. I don't particularly want Fernando Tatis Jr. Okay, I don't want to. I think he's risky, whatever the reason might be. Okay.
Okay.
Um, if I don't nominate him, somebody else will nominate him. He's so expensive, he'll probably go no matter what pretty high. For
Right.
me to nominate him does not extract any value from the room. The dude is going high.
Yeah.
He's going to be brought up. Somebody will do it. It's a waste of my nomination for him because he's already going high.
Okay.
I don't just nominate guys because they're high to get off money off the board. They're going to be nominated anyways. And I'm not
Right.
paying.
Right.
I'm not buying Tatis. So what the hell do I have to nominate him?
Yeah.
But if I don't want, for example, I don't want high end first baseman. I'll say I don't want Freddie Freeman, Bryce Harper, Vlad Jr. because I want to play first base earlier. First base later on in the draft. I want the cheap ones. Well, what I would do is I would say, okay, what's the order? Probably Vlad, Harper, Freeman, Olson. Maybe that's around the order.
Hmm.
I don't nominate the highest guy in the room. I'll nominate maybe the third guy. I'll nominate Freddie Freeman. And that
Hmm.
creates market economic pressure because then it cuts the tier in half. The guys at the top, Vlad Jr. appears to be, oh my goodness, there's not a lot of guys left in that tier. Oh my goodness, somebody then nominates Harper. Wow, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is like the only good guy remaining in the tier, and it's a tier that I don't
Yeah.
want. That creates more pressure. So I don't nominate the
Ah,
highest guy. I
yeah.
nominate guys to influence the economics to create more demand and less supply to get as much money that somebody doesn't want to pay for that tier as possible. That's how I would extract
Ah.
value from the room, not just say let's nominate a high guy that I don't want. I actually would nominate a guy under the guy I don't want, so that the guy I don't want, when somebody nominates him, goes even higher.
That's fantastic, man. I love the way the splitting the tiers, man. I think that's fantastic. Something I never really thought too much of. Don't do the high end guys do three or four. So people are like, well, maybe if I don't get Freddie Freeman now, I might lose out on Vlad Guerrero later or
Create
whatever.
panic,
So yeah,
right? I want to
yeah,
create panic. Oh my god,
yeah,
artificial panic in the room so that
yeah,
people get pressed. Oh god, I want a first baseman, gotta grab him. And then you have, let's say there's three people fighting over it. They all fight, it goes higher, and I didn't want him anyways. So it's about manufacturing demand in a closed
mhm,
economic system. I'm being really mathematical, but the truth of the matter is it really
yeah.
works.
Man, that's awesome. It reminds me of a quote from Game of Thrones: "Chaos is a ladder, and that you get to create that chaos and climb that ladder." So let's pivot now from nominations to your bids. And my first basic question is: how do you divvy up your money between pitching and batting?
Okay, well, I think there's two questions about divvying up money between pitching and batting.
Okay.
There's number one, what I'm going to put on my sheet, on my value sheet, so that I'm prepared to bid on numbers. Like, what numbers am I bidding on for
Okay.
players? And you have to determine what the split is between pitchers and batters. And then there's the question of, in the end, what am I going to spend, right? Because I can optically say that there's more money in one, but yet buy more of the other, right? It has nothing to do with the plan. The first question, and how optically should I view players and how should I split it on my value sheet, that has to do with the market. And I will try to pick the split best what I think the market is splitting. If the room has tended to go 70-30 in the past, I will do it 70-30. If I'm playing the NFBC and it's like 62% hitters, 38% pitchers, I'm going to put that in, and that's my split. And the reason for that is because I want to be indifferent to whether I see a bargain for a pitcher or see a bargain for a batter. I mean, if for example, just take the exaggerated case, if I put a split of, let's say, 65-35, but for some reason the market decided on going 90-10, they just
Mhm.
valued batters. I would think that every batter is a terrible, terrible buy, and I would think that every pitcher that comes up is, oh my god, what a bargain. And I would end
Right.
up with the best pitching team, and I would have a terrible batting team because I didn't use the market numbers. If that's the case, I'm going to lose, or I'm going to finish in the middle because I'll cream the pitching and I'll be terrible in hitting. It's not
Right.
about what I think. It's about how the market plays, right? And you have to be able to
Okay.
adjust on the fly. But going into it, I want to have the numbers as close as I can to the market. In terms of what I want to buy, well, they have to do with my plan. When I'm making a plan, I'm seeing where the hotspots are. There's a first base hotspot at $10. There's an outfield hotspot at $25. There's a pitching hotspot at 20, 15, 5, 2, and 2. And I try to see where the hotspots are, try to add up the numbers and arrange it so that it adds up to the total, or maybe $2 less so I can have some flexibility.
Yeah.
And that will sort of dictate what my perceived spend is. Now, during the auction, I don't have to be true to that. If I see there's more bargains in hitting, I can tilt more in hitting. If I can see
Right.
there's more bargains in pitching, I'll tilt more in pitching. I'll also say that if I'm better at evaluating hitters, maybe I'll give it an extra 1-2% to pitchers in terms of my percentage spent, just so I can. I need a little bit more help because I'm less of a good evaluator of pitching. So I'll throw a little bit more money just so that I get a better pitching because I can sneak better bargains in hitting. Do all those things, and that's how I come up with what I do.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. When you're assigning value to players, do you have do you have a specific value for each player you don't want to go over, or you kind of set it up in a tier kind of situation?
No, I have a specific value for each player. I
Okay.
know some people are crazy to the cent. I'll generally do it to the dollar.
Yeah.
I'll have it. I'll have a number. Now, again, remember I said it's all a market thing. So if I
Right.
said to the
Right.
market is a dollar over, I'm okay with saying, okay, take my numbers and add a dollar. But no,
Right.
I calculate the dollar. Why wouldn't I want to be precise, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I calculate everything. You see the tiers by calculating the dollars, right? I see that. Oh, third base is there's a bunch of guys up top, third base. Then there's not much. Then there's Mark Vientos and starts a new tier. So you see the tiers by getting the actual dollars of value, not vice versa.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. How much do you think is too much to spend on a single player, or is there a number there?
What do you mean by too much to spend? I mean, if a guy is $25, you're asking how much more I would go over the value?
Yeah, yeah, no. I mean, would you? Is there a certain point where, like, you know what, I'm not going to spend. It's like Shohei Otani. I'm not going to spend like too much on a single. Like, is there such thing as that, or if it's worth it, it's worth it?
So in general, again, I do the market premium thing as I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, and of course I do
Yeah.
cap it at about $5 over. If I have Otani valued at 45, I'm not going to go over 50 in any
Okay.
circumstance. I will say though that it depends on the format you're in. It's prohibitive to have too many high players. If I'm playing in a mono league, I generally don't want $40 players. I think it's
Right.
prohibitive into what you want to do. If I'm in a mixed 15 team league, I generally don't want to go over around $42. If I'm in a mixed 12 league, I won't go over 45. So
Okay.
it depends on the format, but you also have to have a team construct. And to me, if you're really going overboard, it really hinders you. It's very prohibitive later to what you want to accomplish. Because remember, the idea is to get a lot of bargains. If you just buy a guy up top and you have less money to spend to get the bargains later, you're not going to afford them. There could be bargains going on in the mid rounds. And if you have too much of a spend up top, you won't be able to take advantage of those sales in the middle.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that kind of segues perfectly into the. Well, I was about to ask you about saving money for later in the drafts. Do you think it's better to would you rather have more mid-tier players, or do you want to make sure you leave the draft with at least a couple of high-end guys?
So again, it really depends on the pricing. If the
Okay.
pricing is really good, I'm happy to
Mhm.
spend on three $30 players. If the
Right,
pricing
right.
is poor, I'm happy to spend just on one. Or maybe in a weird scenario where everything is so hot, maybe even zero. I've done drafts where I've had either of them. I'm prepared in each auction to go either route, right? I don't go coming in and saying I'm gonna get three $25 guys or I'm gonna get three $30.
Mhm.
I don't come in doing that. I come in and seeing at every price tier what are the values, what are the bargains,
Oh,
and I'll activate myself if there are. And if there's not, I'll say, well, I know that it's because up top there was no bargains. I know it's a zero-sum game. There's going to be bargains later on. So,
Right.
I'm prepared to go either. In my experience,
Okay.
a lot of people are very hot up top. I generally play the middle more than I do the top. But I've played in tons of leagues where I'm pretty aggressive early on because I see the market is just paying a small premium. This guy's
Mhm.
$1 over, only $2 over. That's the case. If players up top are only $1 or $2 over, I'm buying that all day because
Yeah.
I know there won't be a pocket in the middle. Players are
Mhm.
$7 over. I can just wait.
Mhm.
I can go
Right.
40 players without picking a guy. And because I know I'll swoop in for 20, 20, 20, 20, I'll get everybody. So it's really about knowing, having patience, seeking the
Mhm.
temperature of the room, and knowing when to respond. But never go in saying you have to do something. Be prepared. If you go if you go to the store, Paul, if you go to the store and you don't exactly know what you want to buy, but one day you go in and you can say, "Oh, this is really expensive chicken. This is expensive meat. I'm gonna do this today. It's great price. I'm gonna do it." And sometimes you're like, you know what? Let's go cheap. There's a better value here. Like you gotta be prepared to buy anything, and that's how you get what's a bigger bargain.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love you. Keep yourself flexible. Be ready for anything. It seems to be the overall general view here. So now let's move on to the creme de la creme, the ATC projections. Give us just a general quick overview of how your projections and how you do your projections.
All right, so my projections are an aggregation model. I'm not, for the most part, saying, okay, let's look at the pitcher velocity and let's look at the barrel rate and comes up with a number. I'm looking at other really great projections that are out there. And it's the wisdom of crowds method. When you see a bunch of stuff, the consensus is usually better. Nate Silver is my model is based very loosely on Nate Silver when he does his political forecasting models.
Yeah.
For he doesn't do his own polling, but he wants to come up with the right poll numbers. He looks at a bunch of different polls,
Yeah.
he knows which polls are better for which state, and he averages them. He takes 20% of this one and 5% of this one and 7% of this one for this New York. For California, he'll do a different panel where he thinks that's going to be the most accurate answer. And so I have a different kind of blending model for every single statistic that we project. And when you're doing that, I'm never going to get an outlier correct. Like, Aaron Judge, if he had 62 homers, I'm never going to predict that, right? Because
Right. Right.
averages sort of smush things. I'm never
Yeah.
going to do that. But if you're talking about a long-term bet on players up or down, the aggregation and my method will get a better thing. When I tell people is the strength of ATC is not in the magnitude, it's the frequency. And what I mean by that is if you said, is this player a good buy at the price? ATC will be right more of the time than other
Yeah.
models. And if you think about it, it's not about how high you can get on a magnitude. It's getting things more correct. Because let's say you're Aaron Judge and he had an amazing season. He was but this year, Shohei Ohtani he had a $60 season. He was amazing. 50-50 and everything. As long as my model predicts higher than the market, I'll be buying the player. I didn't have to predict a 50-50 season. If I predicted a 45-45 season, just as good because I would say buy him all day, right? So it's about
Right.
getting it
Right.
right. And when you
Yeah.
do the aggregation, that really helps with the buy signal and pass signal for determining whether to buy our player or not.
Man, that's I think that's what draws me to your projections more than others because that's kind of how I've kind of always done my fantasy research in a way. I'll go through and do my own research and I'll kind of back check myself on other lists and stuff and say, okay, well, what are other people saying? And if I'm just like way off, it'll make me reevaluate how I go. And so I love how you aggregate that type of those all the other projections because there's just so many stats in baseball. There are so many numbers out there, and to be able to focus it down and have someone do that legwork to aggregate it all for us is incredible, and it's so incredibly valuable that way. So as spring training happens, as you get more data, how does like spring training news and data from new data that you get throughout the off season from here to the end or the end of the off season, how does that change your projections? How do you deal with that?
I mean, it flows into the underlying projections that I use, and then
Okay.
after it flows into them, it flows into me as well. So
Okay.
there's a little bit of a lag, right? Because I'm relying on other projections. They take a day or two, so it'll
Mhm.
take me an extra day or two more. So there's a little bit of a lag to it, but it'll flow in eventually.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense. That really does. Do you ever make manual adjustments?
Sure.
Okay.
I would say that for rate there's playing time and there's rates per playing time. In terms
Okay.
of the rates, generally not, unless I perceive there's an error. And there's a
Okay.
lot of errors. A lot of times you can see the projections are just missing something, or a
Mhm,
certain,
mhm.
that looks old or dated, or it's based on different change. So if that's the case, I'll make manual adjustments on,
Right. Right.
on the rates because of error. But playing time, sure. A lot of projections don't get things right. A lot of projections are missing it. There's a lag, playing time. They don't understand this. Now, I'll never say, I really think this guy's going to get more. I'm not going to do that kind of observation. But for example, pitchers returning from injury. If you just do a simple aggregate, the same formulaic aggregation of the players, you're going to see the innings pitched so high, like Jacob deGrom. Jacob deGrom is not
Yeah.
pitching 170 innings. Dude,
Right.
it's just not.
No.
So it's not a manual adjustment. It's an adjustment that I run a regression on a certain cohort of players that are returning to know that you got to take off X percent and things like that. So the manual play here is I sort of go through everybody and make sure they're in the right cohort. All right, DeGrom is the injury returnee player. This guy is the rookie. Put in this bucket, right? So it's about knowing which bucket to put things in, and then running the proper regression and the proper adjustment that I normally do on top of everything. So it's a complicated process. But I don't go in and say, no, it's 400 at bats. I don't do that.
Yeah.
I have rules to what I do, so I keep
Yeah.
myself honest. But I do a lot of manual. I do a lot of manual checking. Is what I
Yeah.
would tell you.
Okay. Beautiful. That question was more of a personal curiosity, honestly. So I was like, oh, well, how does if you're just like if you feel like someone's just way off, do you make the correction yourself? So as your projections came out this year, do you mind sharing us with a couple of names of players that the numbers just surprised you?
So I don't really work that way in terms of I was thinking this guy is this, and there we go. I sort of do the opposite. It's here's ATC projections, and I go with that assumption. I'll then take a
Mhm.
look at the player and see if I think that ATC makes sense. Oh, what's missing? Do I really believe the projections? Is there a blind
Mhm.
spot to projections? It's not that I have a notion and get surprised. But I will say, though, that what did surprise me was take a guy Jacob Wilson.
Okay.
Rookie for Oakland, or I should say it's now Sacramento, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
But he came out as one of the top 10 batting average players in my model. I have him batting 282, which is
Mhm.
crazy. That's so high. So that surprised me. I'd also say that a guy like Xavier Edwards, I know he's good. I know he had a great last half of the season, but it surprised me just how much he was good, and he's like an upper echelon player, maybe like a top 10, 12 round player according to my projections. Even more, I'd say he's maybe even worth like a top 8. I
Mm.
didn't. I was surprised about that, but the model believes that the batting average is large. I mean, he batted 328 last year. He's not going to
Yeah.
do that again, but the model
No.
believes he is almost a 290 player, and he's going to steal all those bases. He had 31 stolen bases and only 265 at bats last
Yeah.
year. I mean, I don't think he's going to hit 60. My model's predicting 38, but 38 is still a significant number. So those
It
are
is.
two that are like, wow, really? Those are that good? And the market is really that down on these guys? See, ATC let me. It bubbles up to the top guys that hey, let's give it another look. That's really how it works for me.
Nice. No, yeah, that make Xavier Edwards is definitely a guy that me and Anthony, the other guy that does this podcast with me, are talked about extensively. We're both really in on him. And I think you're right in terms of that the 38 stolen bases. While that he might get more than that, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about not wanting to be the person that projecting the 60 stolen base season kind of thing. You're just looking to be the most correct, and I think that's a very adequate number there. I mean, because even if he's if he just hits that, that's still a damn good season. And so, yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a couple of changes to your projections this year in terms of at least in the naming of things. You had inter SD, and inter SK, but now there are different names now, and you changed it up a little bit. Do you mind delving in a little bit to the what those changes are?
Yeah, well, I mean, this could be a very long discussion, of course, if you want to get into the whole volatility. But interest D, interest K, those sounded really, really, really nerdy, even for this, and very
Mhm.
confusing. So I went with a little bit better, more refined names.
Yep.
My volatility metrics are vol for volatility, skew for skewness, and dim for dimension.
Yeah.
Volatility is how tight the projections are underlying the ATC average. There's some players that the projections are, 32 homers, 32 homers, 31 homers, 32 homers. If you see a guy with that kind of projections underneath, you know that it's a little bit more true because everybody
Right.
is projecting it. There's less parameter risk there.
Yeah.
Skewness is very important because skew tells me if there's an outlier. If there's a high outlier, then the ATC average is such, but it's being pulled into the positive direction. If I went with wisdom to crowds and I said, let's just remove that high outlier, the ATC average would fall. Now, I used to be skewness. A negative skewness would be better in before because if you remove it's being pulled to the negative. If you remove them, it's better. I flipped the sign. A positive skew is now better. This guy
Right.
has more upside if he's got a positive skew. And then dimension. You always want to know. People talk about, oh, this guy's a 5-tool player. Oh, this guy just steals bases. He's a one-dimensional player. Well, now I have a statistic for that. A one. I have the dimension statistic will be on a scale from 1 to 5. 5 would be perfectly balanced in every category. Which remember,
Mhm.
just 3 categories. 1 would be literally just one category, and it gives you a flavor of what the dimension is. The average player is something like around a 3.6 dimensional player, right? At least three. At least I should say dimensional for what you would roster actively, right?
Right. Right.
And you can see just how much. If you are planning a team, you might want to have more uniqueness in the profile. You might want to have a more guys spread out. I mean, I like Julio Rodriguez early on because he's a 5 category player, and that would be his dimension is like 4.8. So
Mhm.
it's that dimension tells you something about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. And I love the way you broke that down because it's especially when you're trying to sift through the wisdom of the crowd. Sometimes the crowd disagrees heavily, and so finding a way to maximize the value of the guys that have agreement as opposed to a lot of like you call it volatility is a very useful thing to have. But so we're getting close to having to wrap things up here. I would wonder if you maybe share a couple of guys that you're particularly interested in, or might not so be interested in, guys that are just kind of on your brain right now.
Well, just two that I was just looking at the other day. How about Ryan McMahon? Every year, I don't know why nobody wants to buy this guy, but he just turns out an $11-12 year every single year. I have him has the second lowest volatility. His volatility is 1.2, which means that pretty much every projection is within the dollar of each other
Mhm.
in terms of value. Yet the market is paying like 20th round. You can get a $10 guy in the 20th round. That's a huge,
Mm.
huge, huge discount. What does Ryan McMahon do? He's hit 20 homers every year since 2019. 2020 at the pace of 2020 was over 20. But yeah, there's no reason not to pick him. And on the pitching side, Tanner Bybee. Tanner Bybee has that positive skew where there's just one projection there's one projection that's pulling down the average, but he's actually much better. And Bybee, he's got a consistent whip. He's got the strikeouts, but he has upside in wins. He has upside in ERA. He's a guy that he can go sub-3 ERA. And by the way, I'm projecting him with a 3.7 ERA, which is not great. But that skew tells me that there's more than meets the eye. I would actually buy him for better than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's great about McMahon is that if you go and you might be thinking, oh, he's a Coors guy. He's a Coors guy. And well, actually, the splits home and away for him last year weren't bad. Like it wasn't like he was just astronomically better. It wasn't like a Brandon Rogers situation. And then I had Bybee on multiple teams last year. I absolutely love Tanner Bybee. I think you're absolutely right about him being a solid ERA asset. I really like him. A couple of guys that just real quick on my end. I really like Corey Seager. He's a guy that has a high volatility on your projections. But I saw that came from the counting stacks and the runs and the RBI. I think the Ranger offense might be a little bit better this year than what a lot of people might be thinking based on what they did last year. And so for me personally, I might be a little more in on a Corey Seager type. It's team context is something that seems to kind of play a role here. Uh, how do you feel like someone like a Corey Seager? If you don't mind me asking, like, am I off base on my thinking here, the improved team context, or is it, or am I just missing something here?
No, I mean, Corey Seager is a fine player. I've actually I don't think I've ever rostered the dude. I always think he's bought for more expensive than he should be. He's got
No.
ticky-tack injuries in the past. His ATC volatility metrics are garbage this year. He's got a
Mhm.
5.7 volatility, which
Yeah.
means there's a heck of a big range. His skew
Yeah.
is -2. I know he's had 30 home runs or more the last 3 years, but he's going in the 4th round. He's not
Mhm.
going to earn that price tag. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I just can't see it. And he has some downside. He earned $16 last year. He was a $28 player the year before. He was a $19 player 3 years ago. I just see enough variance that something can derail him. I don't know. He's had a high average, but I don't know. 2 years ago, his BABIP was 340. I can see his BABIP swinging the other way. I don't know
Mhm.
what effect the I would say that the shift, reducing cutting the shift, that has a little bit of an effect on him,
Sure.
but
Sure.
maybe they figure out something else. Like there's enough doubt in me to say that he's a good, solid player, but he's going way higher than he should.
Right, right. And of course, as always, like we discussed earlier, the market's setting the price. And if the market's making it too expensive, then sorry, Seager, you won't be on our teams. And then there's one more player here. He has a high positive skew, but I'm very in on is a Brent Rooker. I really like his quality of the bat numbers and stuff like that. If you're looking at a Brent Rooker with the high positive skew, is the skew number something that's just so is there one? I guess my question is the skew or interest D, is there one that's like more important than the other, or are they all combined together tell a story?
So the volatility metric is a second order statistic, right? You have your ATC average. That's the first order.
Mhm.
That's the most important, right? I wouldn't pick a high skew player over an ATC guy. The second
Okay.
order statistic is important. If you have a lot of variance, I would probably not pick them. But I would say that for me, the volatility is more at the extremes. If there's guy got a really low volatility or really high volatility, then it matters. Skew in my studies, skew actually correlates more with expected earnings in terms of differentiation. I think I can get more juice out of looking for the skew. So for me, skew is actually way more important. But again, if a guy has a high volatility, I would still stay away from them, even if it has a good skew, right? Because skew is a third order statistic.
Okay.
But I think it's pretty predictive, actually.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I love the way you put that. The first order, second order, third order statistics kind of things. That's extremely helpful, man. Before I let you go, Ariel, is there anything you wanted to add on?
Oh, I mean, you could talk all day with this,
Right.
obviously. Thank you so much for having me. This is definitely fun. Yeah, the best thing I can tell you is for auctions is patience and look for the
Yeah.
value. Don't ever push. ATC projections, you have to know how to use them, but they're a fantastic tool and they are the most accurate for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, definitely don't panic and don't just sit there and smash that dollar button, man. Just definitely practice patience and stick to your guns. I get you, man. He's Ariel Cohen. You can follow him on the Twitter at ATCNY. That's at ATCNY on Twitter. And also he writes for Fangraphs and Rotoballer. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been a great podcast. Once again, make sure you follow me on the Twitter at PaulW_34, at PaulW34 on Blue Sky with no underscore. And of course, the Sports Ethos Fantasy Baseball accounts at Ethos Fantasy BB on Twitter, at Ethos Fantasy MLB on Blue Sky. We got a draft guide hitting here real soon. Make sure you're following the Twitter accounts to get access to those draft guides. We got my projections of Williamson 300 coming out. I still think that's a weird branding name for me, but I'm very honored to be able to do it. I'm honored to be able to share a podcast with a guy as your stature, Mr. Cohen. I appreciate you joining us, man. And man, you enjoy your day. Have fun at work later.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
Yes, sir. This has been Sports Ethos. This has been Fantasy MLB Today, a Sports Ethos presentation brought to y'all by Bet Online. Y'all have a good one. And I think we're